Ready?
Yeah, take
All
it
right.
away.
My name is Emmanuel Pratt, and my talk today is on urban agriculture, aquaponics, and the post-industrial city. A little bit about myself. I graduated from Cornell University with a bachelor's in architecture, a master's in science in architecture and urban design at Columbia University, and at the latter stages of my doctoral candidacy at urban planning at Columbia University. Probably, if not more importantly, and equally as important, I'm a husband, father, educator, farmer, global citizen, and lifelong learner. Now, because I am on this quest to figure out what this means, and doing this with Dixon and a number of others in the room. From this background, from the academic background, it's more so around the built environment. I wanted to ground this conversation, ground the theory, and around what is possible in the built environment. So we have architecture, by definition, is the balance, again, as Dixon pointed to, of art and science. And then we also have the physical built building. We have this product, and we have a style. Urban designing is in between the nebulous worlds of architecture and urban planning. So, urban planning is the regulation of those spaces and is with respect to economic functions and social impacts of the urban environment. So the conversation is really around what is the future of this city globally. We went from a 20th century paradigm and we're shifting into a 21st century paradigm. So I take a snapshot from an aerial view of a static shot of Chicago that you see when you fly from an airplane. It's beautiful. Never gets old, always something new, but you can see the spatial arrangements. You can see the downtown. You can see that old paradigm. You can see, when people thought that you had to operate with your financial district downtown. That's shifting. So we have to keep this with respect to a time, an evolutionary span. Just as an example, from CMAP, the Chicago Metropolitan Area Planning, they have this snapshot from 1900, 1950, 2005, what's happening with the population. And as you can see, it's growing, but they're anticipating by 2040, there's a 2040, go to 2040 plan out around the future of the city. And they're saying, today, 8.5, 8.6, and then by 2040, 11 million people in the region. That has very specific impacts on transportation. It has very specific impacts on water use planning, where do people live, and then where are the opportunities for development, redevelopment, right? Where do people have access to food? What's also interesting in this is that this is in the middle of the Rust Belt. So Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Louis, Detroit, we've all heard about what's happening in Detroit. They're trying to figure out how to save the city by possibly shrinking the city, possibly farming, and people are already farming. They've been doing it for a long time. This is interesting because this snapshot shows these emerging industries that are starting to shape. There's a study that's like 65% of the kids that go to school right now are going to go into an industry that doesn't exist by the time they graduate, because somebody's going to invent the new version of Twitter. Somebody's going to invent the new version of something else, and then it has this radiation. It goes viral. When you put the employment with respect to the unemployment, it becomes really interesting. This is unemployment that obviously the redder, the darker, the more grave the situation in the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt used to be one of the economic generators in the world, But we also have to keep in mind this is around 20% of the world's freshwater resources, the world, the planet. So we really have to constantly think through scale. What does it mean through scale to have a city? This is one of my photos. I do photography and videography and all that kind of stuff. I travel, I wander, I drift, I talk. And so the snapshot on 57th Street looking east, and we have different types of building forms and building types, and you get these landscapes of development and undevelopment, disinvestment, redevelopment. So we have these things that are kind of frozen in time, but tell a beautiful story, and they want a new life, but we're not quite sure what life they're going to have in this 21st century context, right? And we're trying to figure out how to reprogram the city. What we are understanding more and more is with the global economic collapse, we have a chronic urban problems that are plaguing not just the United States, but around the planet. And they're all interconnected. Physical deterioration of housing, factories and shops, poverty, unemployment, health issues, and the environment. They're all interconnected. We've been operating in a 20th century silo, but we're trying to break that silo. Snapshot, and you know, Mary Gallagher did a number of studies about the food deserts in Chicago, and you know, there's a direct correlation between African American minority groups that have lack of access and live in environmentally deteriorating or dangerous neighborhoods. So you couple that with not just in the city of Chicago, but over the course of the past 20, 30 years, we've watched the planet's health shift. We went from a point where we had maybe 10 to 15% obesity to now almost everyone having 30% or more. And that's shocking. So we are in this paradigm. I'm very glad that you mentioned this earlier. We are in this paradigm shift, and we're looking at the patterns, but what is the philosophical and theoretical framework and scientific models that have got us to where we are today? And we have to do this paradigm shift. I mean, this is a snapshot. We went from agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, deindustrialization, globalization, age of information. Now we're talking about meta cities, because now I'm getting like 15 emails right now from all over the country and planet. And then age of transition. We are in this transition now into every single time there's a paradigm shift, there's a new idea that it becomes a vehicular idea. And it arises and it carries the weight, and it's like an engine that everybody gets behind and tries to figure out what's next. So, you know, these vehicular ideas also get ridiculed, they get supported, they get loved. And in this instance, that is the vertical farm. That's where we are in the context of history in this transition between the 20th century paradigm to the 21st century paradigm. So when you do Google searches, you find a wide array of images, and we won't spend too much time on these, but I just take a look. And you react a certain way. It causes you to think. Some are, again, within context. Others are without context. But this is where I appreciate my journey, because it's a delicate balance between the social sciences and the natural sciences. The social sciences is the branch of science that deals with institutions, human society, interpersonal relationships, with respect to economics, political sciences, so on and so forth. The natural science is much more the biology, chemistry, physics. So where we are is we're having a conversation around what science is. What is the role of science during a paradigm shift to spark the creative imagination and keep that rigor so we can go between our intuition and actually find a method to figure this out. So that's where urban agriculture and aquaponics fits. For those not familiar, urban agriculture is the growing of plants and the raising of animals within and around cities, and that's very complex because it's part of an agricultural system. It's a lifeline. Some people do it for profit, some people do it for hobby, but everybody wants to eat. We all need to eat. It requires water. It requires light. It has an impact on the city form. Aquaponics is a living ecosystem, and it is a delicate balance. It is about this combined culture of fish and plants in recirculating systems. And this is really a story of heuristics in a scientific lens. Trial and error, learning by doing, repeat, hypothesis, what actually worked, what didn't work, in what context. And it's a problem-solving technique. So a lot of the world has grown to know Will Allen from Milwaukee. He became a leader with urban agriculture and aquaponics. He took a former greenhouse that was a 20th century paradigm in the middle of a residential neighborhood in the suburbs in Milwaukee with growing power, and he started experimenting with this concept of verticalization within the greenhouse. Instead of growing just on the ground, he was using compost-rich soil to grow in stacks, and then he started incorporating aquaponics for the fish live in the water. You feed the fish, they eat, they excrete, the water gets pumped up to the plants filter the water, and it returns back to the fish. He learned how to increase his volume of production within the same space. Triple, and in some instances, 8 times as much, right? And you can do it in a dense manner. Now we have Washaku Kabbalah architects that are in conversation with them. They've been trying to figure out how do they translate that process into an actual vertical farm. It's a challenge. You know, a lot of people lose sight of the fact that a gallon of water is 8.4 pounds. 1,000 gallons of water, do the math. You know, you don't want that on your roof if you can't support that. How do you get that all the way up to the top on the 5th floor? There are some real serious questions that we have. There are possibilities. So out of this heuristics and the trial and error, we have Sweetwater. And our tagline is "There grows the neighborhood." We're on a quest for a urban village. We did a series of studies before, and I'll get to that in a little bit, about what happens when you have a restaurant, a grocery store, a housing, a school, and all of this stuff that supports and is a dynamic feedback loop that feeds back into itself to create new life. So I'm the executive director of the nonprofit arm Sweetwater Foundation. And a co-founder is in the room with me today. And our motto is turning waste into a community resource. Learning by doing, experiential learning, 21st century education, K through life. It's a lot, but we do it, and we've had fun. So here's an example. We took this 20th century paradigm common, and especially in the Rust Belt, boarded up building that was a Harnischfeger site that had an amazing past, right? It was an engine of production, literally. But with the process of deindustrialization, globalization, they moved to Germany, the buildings became vacant. They were on a 4-acre site, which became a brownfield, and we're left with these spaces. This is a common story, repeated over and over again. This is one of the typologies. So with a lot of people curious about possibility and believing in possibility, some people calling people crazy in that possibility, but having the vision and foresight, James Goudsell will attest to this time and time again, we just did it. And action begets more action, begets some funding, begins questions, and begins more action, and you test your theory. So we, during the global financial crisis, the roofing company invested in a housing developer, developed this process of transition. And we went from humping wheelbarrows into carpentry, some academicians and roofers and everybody unite, into a more specialized craft and trade where we had veterans starting to show up, we had people from universities starting to show up. Everybody wanted to be a part. It still is a resounding. I mean, this is in 2008 into 2009. And the city wanted to figure out, what does that mean for the water? How do we negotiate a deal with the water? Is it a recirculating system? Great. How much does it cost in order to do the first part? What's the impact off the hydrant? Does it have to be off a hydrant? All these questions started opening up. Sweetwater is a place for questions, for the heuristic. So the trial and error started with the plants. Under what kind of lights we had to figure out. Do we go T5, LED? Do you have to do HID? Do you have to figure out all these different questions? And a lot of reiterations, and this is where it landed. It was a verticalized farming process. Farming because it actually sold to restaurants and grocery stores within a local capacity in order to fund to come back into the investment process. So the spaces outside began to open up. Now it was a balance between what makes the most sense, growing outside versus indoors. Along that journey, I ended up going back and forth between Chicago and ended up getting married and having a child. And my roots were then in Chicago. And I'm currently the director of aquaponics at Chicago State University in the south side of Chicago at 9601 South Cottage. We have an aquaponics warehouse, Aquaponics Center that's being transformed out of this warehouse. And this is an example, 20th century shoe warehouse that, again, similar story, boarded up, kind of forgotten, empty space, but structure still intact. And Miles Harston from Aqua Ranch started looking at another iteration of, instead of using the lumber, you use the actual metal rackings that were in the space. The metal rackings and the wood that was in the space became the frame for the actual aquaponics system. Again, waste to community resources. And we have life in the sunroom space. Trial and error, learn by doing, study it. In this case, we had tilapia, Sweetwater, we had yellow perch, tilapia, and others, but in 10 months, full production. And over the course of the life, the biology of the fish, we had cycles of plants, various plants, basil, chard, arugula, lettuce, so on and so forth. So here's some examples. Then the question became spatial analysis. What's the actual light? What's the wavelength? What's the waveforms? What types of plants under what condition? What's the lighting? And then the people started showing up. Everybody wants to see what's possible. Anytime in the world in the history of evolution, we want to see what's possible. We're starting to experience what's possible. So what's great about this is we actually are attracting folks that are disengaged learners that they don't learn in the traditional manner in the classroom. And we have these intersections in these vacant lots and these vacant warehouses, these dynamic intersections that cause people to appreciate the possibility of something being possible. I'm very serious about that. I mean, like, a lot of people think I don't care because I don't think there's any other way. Now they're starting to find there's other way. We have these mentorship programs that are starting to happen. And we have veterans working with college students, working with parents, working with teachers, working with K through 12. They want to know what's next with the city. How can they be a part of the future of the city? How can they be a part of building that future of the city? Science, technology, engineering, art, agriculture, and math have never been, they're not abstract anymore. It's a more dynamic way of teaching and a more dynamic way of learning. As you care for it, it continues to grow. People put some tools in their hands, they learn. So we shrunk the model down even more, 5-gallon, 10-gallon. We stuck it in classrooms, repeat. And now these folks are teaching others. We have a third grader that attended a college at UIC over the summer to try and figure out how to become a scientist. You know, it's great. Rotary systems, we're also trying to figure this out. You have an omega system, you can stack 80 to 100 plants in a 3-foot diameter and it's rotating. New spaces emerge, new paradigms. You have a former garage that becomes the fish house, and then the actual aquaponics system goes into that. Vacant asphalt places become verticalized spaces for growing that become the AP biology class at Whitney Young, Michelle Obama's alma mater. So that it becomes a lens for how do we teach, how do we encourage, how do they own. We introduce the technology piece into it. This is, the reality is 21st century, we've got video, photo, and then we took Google SketchUp and then started using it as a creative design tool. As they are learning, they are designing and they're conceptualizing and then they're measuring and then they're doing sketchy physics and they're trying to figure out what is the right scale and capacity. And then they learn how to render it at 8th grade. As a snapshot, in 2 years, this is who's come to us. In 2 years. This doesn't include our latest project in India. We sent 10 students to India to turn it's a growing networks project in Kerala, India, where we sent 10 students with 2 of our interns, not the actual faculty and staff, the interns, who transformed a wet lab into a 21st century aquaponics interdisciplinary teaching lab. So we developed a badge-based learning. We submitted a competition for a haystack program. It was in partnership, partially funded by Gates Foundation, partly funded by MacArthur Foundation, for a Sweetwater aquapond. What is this? If we break it into water, fish, plants, design, and construction, there's different badges that they can attain. A throwback to the old Girl Scout, but it's a competency piece, it's a proficient piece, it's expertise. You have to do it, and you have to repeat it, and you have to demonstrate it. This is where we get to, when you're a competent performer, then we can lean on our architects, folks from the built environment, culinary, restaurants, grocery stores, they want to hire these youth because we want to see what's possible. So they will basically walk out with a 21st century resume in their pocket. We'll be launching this sometime, probably hopefully in March. And the last thing I want to leave you with is this concept of biomimetic informatics. That's what we're talking about. Biomimetic informatics is how do we examine nature and learn from it, and then what is the science of processing that information. But we also want to be aware of the Heisenberg principle. If you're not familiar, the uncertainty principle, if you look too much on one lens, you're going to miss all the other stuff that's coming. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Emmanuel? Right here? Hang on a second, so I don't have to repeat.
How did you get most of your funding for all these projects that you were doing?
The first set of funding was from the roofer sitting next to you, and it was from community roofing projects. Took 30 to 50,000, invested in the first step, a barter exchange around the equipment, and then it attracted more money, more investment, and then that grew, and then over the course of several years, it became $1 million in investment, and then that attracted presidents of the universities being interested, and then so on and so forth.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, Emmanuel, before you leave, and I was hoping that all speakers will address this, how about the challenges? Is this a done deal? What's hard? I mean, can you say that in a succinct way? I mean, what needs to be done here? That's why we're here.
Yeah. Succinctly, everything needs to be done. But more specifically, we're at a point now where we're starting to put sensors into our rendering the invisible to become visible in a way that we can actually do biomimetic informatics in a proper way. So learning by doing puts to the point where we can actually have something that's monitoring the nitrite alkalinity, dissolved oxygen levels, and the stuff that just happens biologically in a system that renders out, and then we can figure out what appropriate technologies we can insert back in. That answer it?
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Robbie.
There's so many levels at which This was really a good talk, Emmanuel.
Thank you.
I just want to ask a question. There's so many levels at which the efficiency of this operation can be evaluated, right? Sunlight, other natural requirements, the economics, and so on.
What are we doing about that?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're doing as a heuristic in creating these spaces in order to have people understand that it's even possible, this is 2 years. Right, so it's kind of been warp speed. But what happened is now at, like for instance, Chicago State Aquaponics, we have a master's in mathematics, a master's in geography, a master's in public health, a master's in, we have all these grad students that are now taking it on as their thesis for longitudinal studies, partnering with wherever we have a gap with science or sociology or something, we partner with another institution. So what we are starting to do is these ongoing rigorous economics, lighting efficiencies, so on and so forth. That's what the digital media learning platform is going to be.